I've just fired up Silent Hill F. I think this is a shader compilation step, and that's one thing we'll want to keep our eye out for here is it's Unreal Engine 5. How stuttery is it? Traversal stutters, shader compilation stutters. We'll keep our eye on that. I also want to test out a variety of hardware. However, I want to start with what I think is a pretty typical Steam user system. It's an RTX 3060 12GB paired with a Ryzen 5 5600X and 32GB of RAM. This is certainly better than what a lot of people have, but also worse than what a lot of people have. The second most popular GPU on Steam is the 3060, and the most popular GPU is the 4060, which is just only slightly more powerful, but has less VRAM. So this is a pretty good idea of what a typical user might have. It's also somewhat close to the performance of like a base PS5 in terms of raw performance numbers. Not exactly, but somewhere in a similar ballpark, not wildly different. So I think it's good test hardware. Now, another thing we should look at is what are the system requirements for this game and kind of how do we fall in relation to that. So the minimum requirements for this game are a GTX 1070 Ti or Radeon RX 5700. So a 3060 is a bit better than that. But the recommended GPU for this game is a 2080 or 6800 XT. Now, a 6800 XT is usually more similar in performance to a 3080, and a 3080 is way more powerful than a 2080. So I'm just going to say that that's a weird pairing. But regardless, if we focus on the NVIDIA GPUs at least, a 3060 is a bit weaker than a 2080. It's more in line with like a 2070 or so raw performance-wise, although the 3060 does have more VRAM than the 2080 did. It was an 8GB card, so maybe something to keep an eye on. The CPU in this system is a Ryzen 5600X, which is a bit more powerful than the recommended CPU, which is a 5500, and definitely more powerful than the minimum requirement, which was a Ryzen 5 2600. So that's kind of where we fall here. Now, they're saying that we should, the minimum specs are only for 30 FPS at 720p at the performance settings. Whereas the recommended would be getting you along the lines of 60 FPS on performance settings, 30 FPS at quality settings, but using DLSS to output to high res, or using 1080p if you're not using upscaling, SSDs required. And what exactly is performance and quality mode? These sound like console-based stuff because that's usually what consoles have. So we'll have to see how the PC specs line up to that. And again, this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, so how demanding is this going to be? So as we shoot the video, the plan here is to play through the beginning of the game, which did have a brief shader compilation step, but it was very brief, which makes me nervous that it didn't maybe catch everything, but, maybe miracles were pulled. Anyway, the point is to play through the beginning of the game. I'll probably edit out sections where nothing interesting is happening. And then when we get to what seems like a typical performance level for the game area, probably swap in some different hardware and change up graphics settings and see how this performs on a variety of systems and graphic settings as needed. So that's the overall plan. You're probably familiar with it if you are familiar with my channel and our PC performance testing when new games launch. Anyway, let's see what the graphics settings defaulted to. So it's defaulted to 1440p at 59 hertz. Why is it defaulting to 59 hertz? That seems obnoxious, but okay. And then frame rate limit at 60. We're going to run frame rate unlimited and VSync off because I want to test out the performance that we can get. However, do keep in mind that because I'm capturing with an external PC, I capture on a separate PC over an HDMI capture card, that's not variable refresh rate, which means that if the footage looks choppy or juddery or there's screen tearing, that's because I'm running with VSync and frame rate limits off on a 60 hertz locked capture. And if this is oddly going to force me to 59 hertz, which seems weird, that could be out of sync with the 60 hertz capture. So don't necessarily judge smoothness by what the video looks like. That's why we have the beautiful frame time graph, which tells us if things look smooth. So here we can see that right now frame times are very smooth. But if you start seeing stutters there, that's when things would actually look choppy in person on a variable refresh rate display. Looks like our preset defaulted to some kind of custom value. It's looking like 100% of resolution at native 1440p using the epic lumen settings. And then it looks like most other things at high although it's actually using TSR at balanced, which I would actually take as being an upscaling technique. So that kind of makes me question what our screen percentage is. So that's a bit odd. Usually it wouldn't be at 100% if we're using some other form of upscaling here, like it's using on this. Although this is just changing the anti-aliasing quality. Is DLSS in here? Okay, so yeah, it seems like that's an odd interaction. So let's keep that in mind. Now, given that we're on 1440p on a fairly older GPU here with the 3060, I think it's going to be fair to start out with DLSS balanced, but then we can try out native resolution if we need to. Now, a bunch of you will want me to turn motion blur off. Too bad. Anyway, I'm just going to do that to trigger you. Anyway, we're going to be at high quality settings, it looks like by default on most stuff. But like I said, it looks like Lumen defaulted to Epic. I'm going to go ahead and switch that down to high. Now, I'm just going to say that in most Unreal Engine 5 games, switching to everything to high is close to optimized settings. Now, sometimes, like, you might be able to get something down to medium without losing too much, or something up to very high or epic, you don't lose too much. But in a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games, switch things down to high makes things perform a lot better and still looks very close to the maximum settings. So I think we're going to start with that, and let's go ahead and launch into the game. We're going to be playing on, what do we want here? What kind of difficulty? Story or hard are the only two options. So for benchmarking purposes, we better make sure this is as hard as possible, because I don't like horror games to be easy. So hopefully that means I can still get through some of the game in a reasonable amount of time. I get to change my outfit. Look at that. A pink rabbit costume seems to be the way to go. So we're going to do that, and let's see what we get. Okay, I'm already noticing some weirdness. Did you see that the hands just loaded in late on that initial cutscene? So that's telling me that it was probably like either something wrong with the streaming, like I'm on an SSD, or there's something wrong with like the shader compilation. So if they were, because the CPU was pegged to like 100% there for a second, right as it loaded into this cutscene. So if that means that they were doing shader compilation as it loaded into the cutscene, perhaps it needed the hand shaders to load. So I've got to say, if the very first thing I see in your game is the hands loading in late on a cutscene, that's not a good first impression. Now, if that's the only issue we find, it's not the end of the world, but I really think you could have at least tested this and noticed that the hands load in late and have done something about that. Now, the next thing I'm noticing is that the cutscene is locked to 30 frames per second, and also the frame time graph isn't completely smooth. So it doesn't seem like it's a perfect lock to 30 frames per second. So first of all, I would prefer an option to unlock the cutscene frame rate, which I'm not seeing. Maybe I missed it, but I looked through the menus, I didn't see it. It'd be nice to just include that option. But if you're going to force a 30 FPS lock, it would also be nice if we see a perfectly smooth frame time graph when that's happening. Just saying. All right, this is obviously going to still be some kind of intro area, but I am at least pleased to see that frame rates are near 60 FPS. I could kick the averages on, so the middle is the average here. On the right is the 1% lows. On the left, FPS number is the current frame rate. And what I'm seeing is overall, around a 60-ish FPS average, even though there's a lot of foliage, which can often be pretty demanding. And again, though, we are on balanced mode DLSS, but this is on a 1440p output on an RTX 3060 at overall mostly high settings, actually pretty much high across the board. So, if performance stays like this throughout, I would say that feels pretty good, that an RTX 3060 can hit these frame rates at a 60-ish FPS average, on a 1440p display at overall high settings. No initial stutters in this opening area, but I'm going to go ahead and keep playing and see if that continues to be the case, or if they caught some of the initial shaders, but that maybe further on we get some frame time spikes or anything. I had a tiny frame time blip you can still see on there as I entered into this area. So it's just a tiny blip of traversal stutter. It wasn't terrible. So hopefully we don't see a lot more of that. But I mean, Unreal Engine 5 is going to be Unreal Engine 5. So we'll keep on going. Looks like we're back to another 30 FPS cutscene. I'll mention that, performance profile-wise, a more closed-in area like this, in this alleyway, performance numbers are actually, over 90 FPS. So really seems like the environment you're in can certainly affect performance. That open area with lots of foliage was certainly much more demanding than what we're seeing here. Anyway, another cutscene. Once again, saw a little bit of a traversal stutter hitch, this time as I passed into this alleyway. So definitely can be some little hitches so far in the opening area. Nothing particularly egregious, but certainly not completely smooth. One little thought graphically is that the hair rendering does seem to be a little bit in motion during these cutscenes. I don't know if you can see it quite right now. We'll see if we get some more up-close stuff. It can seem a bit pixelated. That's perhaps due to the DLSS upscaling that we're doing at the same time. Not bad. The graphics overall look fine, but yeah, I think right there you can see a lot of pixelation on the hair movement. So whether it's the DLSS or not, I don't know if I can change settings during the cutscene. Looks like I can't. But yeah, definitely see some pixelation with the hair. I've seen that in other, Unreal Engine 5 games too, not all of them. So like, I know Cleric's Obscure Expedition 33, that was one of my complaints about the graphics, was that the hair rendering, especially during cutscenes, seemed a bit pixelated at times. All right, we've got some sort of a chase scene going on here. So, figured this might be a good chance to see how things perform. Okay, it's a little awkward running at the camera. Can I turn the camera around? It does not appear to be the case, so okay. We've got fog effects and things. Okay, back to a cutscene. I was going to say it did hold over 60 FPS during that, and I didn't notice any major issues performance-wise or anything. So hopefully soon we'll get through some this kind of more intro area. But okay, we kind of got a chase. We've got some fog effects, some other effects on the screen. Here, let me reset the frame rate counter so the 1% lows are accurate, because remember the cutscenes being 30 FPS kind of messes with the 1% lows if I don't reset the benchmark averages. So we'll kind of keep running through here. Yeah, we do occasionally drop below 60, but nothing too crazy. And back to a cutscene again. All right, we got our first enemy encounter, so looks like we'll be evading attacks. If you dodge just before an enemy attack lands, you will perform a perfect dodge and recover your stamina. Okay, let's see how combat performs here. I might be paying more attention to when to dodge than... Okay, looks like we can lock on. Whoops, I was not paying attention. All right, so we can dodge. Performance seems fine here. We're up like well over 60 FPS. Again, the 1%... okay, I should probably stop looking at the frame time counter. Doesn't look like I have any way to actually fight, so I should probably be running away. And there I died. So that's what I get for trying to record the combat rather than pay attention to what I'm doing. Anyway, we could go ahead and restart that. And get some more performance numbers as I run on through here. Let's reset the frame rate counter. We get the bit of a cutscene here. I'm going to go ahead and skip over that. And we'll go ahead and try to dodge the attack and then actually just run out of the way of the enemy rather than get killed by it. But then I don't get to stare at the frame time graph as much. So it does have its downsides. What I was going to say is, again, overall performance in this area, a lot of the more closed-in streets and such, does seem good. So I just need to get out of enemy's sight to get out of combat. Looks like I did. And again, performance seems all right. 1% lows are still a little bit less than perfect, but nothing too crazy. But again, I think I need to get further into the game before making any big calls on performance and stuttering. I think we're going to get to beat a thing to death with a wrench, or I guess it's a pipe. So anyway, so we get to right bumper for light attacks, RT for big attacks, and chance of stunning. All right, enemies take more damage while stunned. Use X to lock onto an enemy and X again to cancel. All right, we get to try out some combat. Not really like a super big area or anything like that, so we'll see how performance goes. And I guess I gotta keep an eye on my stamina situation. one of those types of games. Okay, did not like lunge forward automatically with the right trigger attack. So learning how the attacks work. Let's try that. There we go. Okay. All right. Beat a weird thing to death with a pipe. So, and performance was pretty solid while doing it. That's the important thing, was the FPS numbers. Again, in these more enclosed alleyways and things like that, overall frame rates seem quite high. That's why I'm interested in continuing to play to see if we get to an area that performs significantly worse than this. If you're wondering what the frame rate's like when you're standing still doing a puzzle, seems to be around 100 frames per second. But if I'm examining an item, it drops to a little bit over 80, so that's important. I'm guessing this has something to do with the flowers symbols on the things, but I'm not going to spoil any puzzles for you. Into another environment, very dark here, but again, performance numbers are still quite high. We're kind of in the 80s in this area for the most part, upper 70s and such. So we'll have to just keep an eye on things. Still waiting to see if I get to some like big open area where performance suddenly gets disastrous. So I don't release a video too soon on the performance before I've played far enough to really know. All right, back to the town area. And again, performance numbers still seem fairly high. Got a little bit of traversal stutter there or something again, where 1% lens dropped a bit when I first got into this area and started running. But nothing too terrible. Looks like a little bit of a stutter here, again, as these enemies appear on screen. But anyway, keep playing through, keep waiting to see if we get to an area where performance is a lot worse. I'll keep pushing through a little farther and see what happens. Very much seems to be the case that when there's more foliage on screen, performance is lower. So we're back down to kind of around 60 with drops into the 50s when looking around with all of this foliage. But again, the actual town area itself seemed a lot higher when there wasn't so much foliage. So far, it seems like the most demanding stuff in this game is areas with more foliage, but like I said, I will keep playing a bit just to make sure. Well, this is frustrating. So you see behind me right now, Danielception, that was me talking while recording and playing on various GPUs as I did a whole bunch more performance testing. And somehow my mic was not turned on. So when I went to edit all of the footage together, I was a little bit disappointed. So anyway, not sure what happened with the mic. It seems to be working now. So I'm going to go ahead and play this footage back and try to tell you roughly what I was talking about here. So I had continued to play the game for a while, running around this town area, and continued to confirm that the areas with more foliage were the more demanding areas. I had played the game for a total of about 2 hours before ending my performance testing. And within that 2 hours, it seemed like this was about as demanding as it got. And actually, the initial area of the game, the second you get control of the character, when you get a bunch of foliage, actually was at least tied with about this kind of area as the most demanding stuff that I had seen throughout much of the gameplay. A lot of the areas have performed a lot higher. So again, maybe at some other point, the game becomes more demanding, but if I want to get this video out day one and I just bought the game and I have a couple hours to play through it and then edit everything together and get it to you, I was basically just saying that at, within the first 2 hours of the game, this seems to be a kind of stress test area. And at high settings, DLSS Balanced 1440p output on the RTX 3060, performance seemed pretty good there. You probably hear my kids running around stomping and yelling because they're having a good time right now. Their grandma's over hanging out with them. So apologies if you hear any noise in the background, but let's run through this recording here a little bit real quick. So this is still the RTX 3060, but I switched actually back to the initial, like you first get control of the character to double check that yes, this actually is performing a bit lower than that other town area with foliage that had more fog. So I'm actually using this now as a stress test, and on the RTX 3060, 1440p output at the high settings, it's kind of a little bit under 60 FPS. So then I went ahead and we adjusted some graphics settings. So that's what we're looking at here. And I went and decided to change the DLSS settings. So switching over to the quality setting to actually make it more demanding on the GPU. But if you don't want to use as much DLSS, testing it out. Again, apologies for all the stomping you're probably hearing upstairs right now, because I wasn't planning on being recording right now. That was earlier. But anyway, that's fine. We're getting a little bit over, kind of over 50 FPS, but it does dip into the 40s, so certainly less performant at the quality setting here than what we were getting at the balance settings. And then I went ahead and tried out native resolution. Now, what I noticed, though, is first I was going to try to use DLAA, but I noticed that there's no DLAA or DLSS native option in the menu. Probably the NVIDIA app might be able to override to that or something, but I didn't see that here. So I tried just switching over to TAA because I couldn't find that option here. So by switching over to TAA, it grays out your upscaling options and then allows you to run at native rendering resolution. So I noticed that it's not balanced there. That's grayed out. TAA, we're at 100% here, where I think that's where that screen percentage comes in. And you can confirm by the performance that it's certainly performing lower. This is native resolution. So this is the 3060 trying to run native 1440p high settings. And yeah, it's only in kind of the mid-30s in this demanding foliage kind of area. But again, it's an RTX 3060. Trying to run high settings on a new Unreal Engine 5 game on 1440p output, is a lot to ask of that at native rendering resolution. So then I was going to drop down to 1080p in the graphics menu, but I noticed that even though we're in full screen, and usually when you're in full screen mode in a game, you can change the rendering resolution. It didn't actually have that option without going to like windowed mode, which was kind of frustrating. So that's kind of a quirk to the graphics menu that I don't particularly like. And then I basically realized that I have to actually close the game, go to desktop mode, and then change my desktop to 1080p and then relaunch the game. So that's what I did. And then we start up the game here at the native 1080p rendering resolution, which I'm just double checking here. So native 1080p rendering resolution now, remarking that it still is also grayed out and then lists 24 hertz, which is odd. It doesn't look like it's only playing at 24 hertz. But anyway, this is the high settings native 1080p with the TAA native pathway. And the 3060 is getting close to 60 FPS. It does drop into the mid-50s. But again, for an RTX 3060, high settings in an Unreal Engine 5 game that just came out, and the 3060 is kind of aging, 1080p, this performance seems pretty decent. If you're on a variable refresh rate display, this is perfectly fine. If you're not, then you'd want to tweak the settings just a little bit to lock to 60, which I think I look at here by saying, okay, so that was native 1080p. But newer DLSS versions, DLSS Quality on a 1080p display really doesn't bother me too much, especially if you need the performance. So I tried out DLSS Quality with the 1080p output on the high settings, and that goes ahead and bumps up performance well over 60 FPS, closer to 70 for a lot of it. So it really seems like the 3060 can do just fine at 1080p, either native or DLSS Quality would probably be worth the performance boost. And then 1440p on DLSS Balanced with the high settings. The game is completely playable on a 3060. So that had me starting to wonder about what if we also turned down graphics settings, not just the rendering resolution. So I did want to look at that. So I popped the graphics menu back open, and we started looking at changing the actual graphics settings. So I went back to TAA native. So this is now native resolution. And then went at the graphics presets. I noticed that the presets seem to be like console kind of presets, whereas performance, balanced, and quality, rather than your usual like low, medium, high. So I tried out the performance preset to see what it did. And it looks like it put lumen to high and put most of the settings to medium except for view distance at high. But it did set upscaling to performance mode using TSR, which is pretty aggressive. So first I tried backing off to just native TAA. So it's the performance mode preset, but without the upscaling that the preset turns on. And then I decided to test out that performance But it is best practice to do a restart of the game. But I did notice that the CPU spiked, meaning it was compiling the shaders for the new graphics preset, which is what it was doing there. But it still does make. But I also, oh yeah, I noticed that also the performance mode preset set a 60 FPS frame rate limit. So I removed that, saw that we were getting, 67 FPS here or so. And then decided that it is best practice to restart the game when changing graphic settings, although I suspected that because of that shader burn, everything was going to be the same either way. But here I am restarting the game, and again, getting about the same performance. Again, that was showing 70, but I was at a slightly different camera angle. So it really seems like the restart may not have been necessary, but it's still always best practice to do so. So this is native resolution at the performance mode preset, but at native resolution. So I turned that off. And we're getting over 60 FPS native resolution on the RTX 3060 in this most demanding area I was able to find in the first 2 hours of gameplay. So that seems pretty acceptable for an RTX 3060, I thought. And then I decided to, glance at the graphics settings, see if there was anything else we would want to play with here. So I thought, well, maybe we don't stick to native resolution. So I tried out DLSS Quality. And using DLSS Quality on these more medium settings, right? The performance mode is mostly medium with a couple things at high. Performance is actually pretty dang solid. So the RTX 3060 here, kind of in the mid 80s, seems pretty good. And I really think that, the image, the graphics that we're getting here still seems to be pretty much a similar experience to what we were getting before at the high settings. So seems a pretty reasonable compromise to drop some things down to medium if you need to. But on a lot of graphics cards, I think staying at the high settings. Now, I was saying that performance is good, but when you look close at things, it's not like this is the most ridiculously good looking, most detailed game world we've ever seen or anything like that. But what I decided to do next was switch graphics cards. So I decided to go to the minimum spec GPU, except the minimum spec GPU is a 1070 Ti, which I don't actually have. But I do have a 1070, which is actually one notch below the recommended, sorry, not the recommended, but the minimum spec for the game. And the minimum specs, system requirements say that the min spec 1070 Ti would only be good for 720p 30 FPS at the performance preset. Well, this is the performance preset, but native rendering resolution at 1080p, and I'm actually around 30 FPS. And again, this is a GTX 1070. This is going on almost 10 years old now, and wasn't even, the top of the lineup at the time. And again, the settings aren't even in complete potato mode yet or anything. The lowest settings are at medium with a couple things at high like view distance and lumen. So what I decided to do from here is also kick on some upscaling. Now, or I thought I was going to kick on some upscaling, or I was confirming that I was at native resolution, I guess is what I was doing first. And I was running around a little bit, but I know at some point here I was going to kick on some upscaling. So let's skip forward a little bit to that. So that's what I'm testing out here. Now, I did notice something weird happen when I did this. First, I tried out TSR Peformance mode. Now, when I kicked that on, I noticed my performance stayed about the same. So I was like, wait a second, was it not actually running at native 1080p before? Or is the TSR Peformance mode glitched? So what I decided to do next is try out different upscaling. First, I was confirming it said 100% resolution up there. So then I was like, okay, let's switch over to FSR and see what that does. So FSR at balanced mode did boost performance, which it wouldn't have done if we were already at TSR performance mode. So it seems like the TSR performance mode was somehow glitched. So this is FSR balanced mode on the GTX 1070 with the 1080p output. And yeah, there's definitely some noticeable FSR pixelation if you look closely in motion and all of that. So it's not the most pristine image quality by any stretch of the imagination. But this is a GTX 1070. It's below the min spec for the game, and we're kind of in the mid 50s or so performance-wise. And yeah, if you ignore the pixelation from the FSR upscale, the overall look of the game, while it's a little pixelated, is still pretty reasonable as far as capturing the art style of the game. So what I decided to do next was try going to FSR Performance mode just to see if we could get to 60 FPS on the GTX 1070. And so was running around and noticed that we're just a little bit shy of a 60 FPS, lock. We do average close to it, but it certainly does go below. So I was like, I guess we'll have to reduce graphics settings. And then what I decided was, you know what? Let's see what potato mode looks like. So I start just turning everything down. So lumen off, everything low, screen space reflections off. If there's an off mode on things, I turn things off. We go to low. So, and I'm leaving on FSR Performance. I think I even turn off the motion blur, which some of you guys like, finally. Anyway, sometimes I leave it on mostly just to trigger people. But anyway, so here we can see that the game really does allow you to go into full potato mode. Like with the lumen lighting turned off, the game looks pretty hideous. But that being said, we're at 120 something FPS on a GTX 1070. So I like the fact that this game allows you to go full potato mode. Because that lets people playing on super old, super weak hardware, integrated graphics, actually have a chance to play the game and just accept the fact that it's not going to look very good. Or people on older hardware who want high frame rates and don't really care what the game looks like have that option. So I like that the game has those options. Now, I decided to at least run it at native 1080p. So if running at native 1080p in full-on potato mode, we're getting around 80 frames per second on the GTX 1070, which is, again, below the min spec of the game. So I like that this game lets you go into potato mode. The lighting looks terrible, but the game is running pretty smoothly on a GTX 1070, which I think is a good thing. Anyway, the next thing I decided to do was switch graphics cards again. This is the 6800 XT. Why did I choose the 6800 XT? Because it's the recommended GPU for the game. Now, the NVIDIA GPU they recommend is a 2080, which generally is a lot lower performance than this, so that's kind of weird. But anyway, this is the high settings at 1080p. On the 6800 XT, so it is still only 1080p, but you can see the performance is pretty good. We're averaging close to 90 frames per second using the 6800 XT at native 1080p resolution. So yeah, 6800 XT seems to be doing just fine. So what I decided to do next, and again, you can see the settings here. It is those high, just high across the board on everything, and it's the TAA native 1080p. So native 1080p high settings, pretty performant on the 6800 XT. So what I decided to do was try out the quality preset and see what that did. It looks like it turned everything all the way up. So very high is the highest those settings go. Other things go to epic. But it did turn TSR on. So I decided to turn off the upscaling. And when I switch all of these graphic settings over, notice it gets some shader compilation burn and all of that. And it does seem to apply the settings, and the performance, proves it. But I noticed I was 30 FPS, and that seemed kind of low. Then I noticed it kicked on a 30 FPS frame rate cap, and this is stupid. This is stuck to console thinking. It's very clear that they just took the console preset, where quality settings have a 30 FPS cap, and they just put that on the PC version. This is stupid. The developers should remove that. So anyway, turning off the frame rate limit, because for some reason going to the quality preset locks you to 30 FPS, we can see that actually the max settings are getting around a 60 FPS average at 1080p on the 6800 XT. Now, I think that that's okay, but I really think the high settings are a better way to go, and that tends to be the case in Unreal Engine 5 games. Also, I think a 6800 XT is better suited to 1440p. So I turned off the game, switched over to 1440p in desktop mode, and restarted the game. This also, for those of you wanting to make sure I did the game restart, okay, we now got a game restart applying these highest level graphic settings. So this is 1440p native resolution at the maximum graphic settings on the 6800 XT. And we're kind of in the 40s or so. Here I'm just showing the graphic settings again, 1440p, frame rate limits off, but otherwise we are at the maximum settings. I was trying to confirm that you can't go above these settings, but by going to the right, it just switches back over to low. So it's like there's not like epic hidden above the very high or something. So I confirmed that we are at the maximum settings. And so maximum settings on the 6800 XT at a native 1440p running around were around 40 frames per second. Kind of in the mid 40s. And again, like I said, a lot of the game was running at a higher frame rate than this area. Now, that's not like amazing performance, but again, it's maximum settings, which are usually pretty unoptimized in Unreal Engine 5 games. They're just like, sure, you can max it out, but you don't get a lot for it. So what I decided to do next is try out some resolution scaling before we turn the settings down. So I decided to go to FSR, but at the quality mode. So FSR Quality, 1440p output, otherwise maxed out settings. And we are getting kind of in the mid 60s or so on the 6800 XT at these settings. I think that's, okay. Again, the 6800 XT is still pretty powerful GPU, despite being, 4 or 5 years old now at this point. But graphics performance improvements have slowed down quite a bit since then. Anyway, so what I decided to do next is try out reduce graphics. So I went to the balanced preset. Notice that it basically switched everything to high except for lumen. So I just switched lumen down to high. So we're now basically at high settings across the board. I also noticed that the balanced preset set a 60 FPS frame rate cap, which I thought was stupid. So anyway, turned that off, and then I switched back to native resolution because it also had upscaling built into that preset. So basically, high settings across the board are native 1440p resolution. We are actually in kind of the upper mid 60s running through this area. So mid 60 FPS range in this area of the game on the 6800 XT, high settings, native 1440p seems completely reasonable performance-wise, for the game. So then I decided, what if you also kicked on FSR Quality? So kicking on FSR Quality boosts performance considerably. We're now up into the 90s, so we're honestly pretty close to 100 FPS on the 6800 XT, 1440p output. Yeah, it's FSR Quality, but high settings across the board. And again, the high settings look pretty close to the maximum settings. So I really think for a lot of people in this game, if you just set high settings, performance is pretty reasonable. So it's not that the game is absolutely perfect or anything like that. But my final thoughts are that I like that the game is performant at the high settings on a variety of graphics cards, with additional scaling available with resolution scaling. But if you're on a reasonably modern graphics card, you don't necessarily have to use resolution scaling in order to get reasonable performance, which I like to see. I also like that it allows you to go all the way down to a potato mode to actually get high frame rates on ancient hardware like a 1070. Sorry if you have a 1070, it's really old now, okay? So that was really good to see. Optimization-wise, I would say that it makes sense why this is more performant than some Unreal Engine 5 games, because if you look at the details up close, it's not super incredibly detailed. There are other games that push see when you get that close to the camera, right? You saw the bush right here and stuff like that. It's not the most incredibly detailed stuff when you look at it closely. So I understand why this is more performant than other Unreal Engine 5 games, but it certainly would have been bad if it looked like this and performed significantly bad. So I think it looks fine and performs fine. Now, other thoughts on optimization, I mentioned at the beginning that the hands were missing in that opening cutscene because I think the shaders were still compiling. That was a bad first few seconds of the game. And I have seen a little bit of traversal stutter and occasional shader burns also causing a little bit of stutter. But honestly, way less stuttery than most Unreal Engine 5 games that I've tested. Compared to something like Borderlands 4, where the first hour of the game was just huge stutter every time something new happened, this is significantly better than that. So overall, if you're thinking about getting this game, and we're concerned about the performance because it's an Unreal Engine 5 game, I would say that while it's not completely perfect, there's some things they could improve. It's not bad. So I think you could enjoy this game if you were interested in it on pretty reasonable hardware and have a pretty good time. Like I said, the Some things could be improved. I don't like that the graphics settings presets include frame rate locks, like the quality preset locking you to 30. That's kind of dumb. So there's some things they could improve, but I thought overall this is pretty good. Hopefully you guys found this video useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.